Okay, this is November 13th. I've got the YouTube up and all the videos on that. I'll put tonight's videos on there as well as soon as they convert on my computer, which might not be till the morning. And you'll have that, so you have all access to all of the current and previous slides. So we'll be able to do that. Let's see, move this around here so I can see you guys and still see the slides. So we're going to talk about chapters 5 and 6 tonight out of the book, and then we'll take our first look at the basics of Six Sigma. So let me share this. Okay. So we're into the improve and control phases that the book talks about. And hopefully you've been, I gave you another little bit more time to do the individual assignment, which is due tonight. And then next week is due the team assignment. So hopefully you've all been able to connect with your team members. As I said before, if you have trouble connecting with team members, you can email me, text me, whatever, and I can email you phone numbers and email addresses for whoever that you're not able to reach. And for those of you who aren't responding, then keep in mind that there is a team evaluation where your fellow teammates evaluate all of you individually. So everyone on the team will evaluate themselves and everybody else on the team as part of the final grade. So if there's any questions about that, you can let me know. I believe the assignment 1 is due today. Is that not right? I can check that. And see what it says.
It was due last week, and we did the chapter.
Due last week, yeah. And then the next one is due next week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And we also talk about the chapter 7.
Okay. Yeah. So a couple of you had trouble uploading your assignments. If you can't upload them, just email them to me and I'll have all the assignment ones graded quickly. I've graded several of them. And it's better to turn it in late than to not do anything. So yeah, that was due last week, I believe. Let me just check and see what it says here.
Assignment 1 had 2 objectives. Was that right? It was the first thing was the recall story. The second one I kind of had trouble with. It's from what I understand, it's from a Cooper Vision. It kind of reads like a interview from a guy from Cooper Vision, and I think maybe one of the objectives in that second task was to identify the stakeholders, and through this kind of back and forth between Martin and Kevin, it's like an interview kind of thing.
Yeah.
I really don't see much detail about who's who, other than that there is a kind of a general sense that the team, like the company, get together and try out ideas and kind of integrate Six Sigma. But I don't see like besides Martin and Kevin, I don't see anybody else who can be considered a stakeholder personally, unless we're talking about like, maybe I'm getting the wrong idea of what they mean by stakeholder.
Well, the stakeholders are everybody that's involved with the program, and they're talking about other people in the company doing things, because it's not just a 2-person project, right?
Right.
So it's anybody else that is affected by doing that project or changing that project, or it's going to reap the benefits from the results of that project.
I see. Okay, I'll just look at that again.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to talk about it, just let me know.
Okay.
Yeah, so Nikon, you say something due November 6th. Yeah, the number 1 was due last week.
Yeah, assignment number 1, but this week I don't think there's anything.
No, it's next week, and it's the team assignment.
It's the team assignment. Yeah, we already talked about it with my team. So
Oh, on that, since we're talking about that assignment, on the file, it says that you pick one of the 3 things to work on that assignment for the team assignment. There's 3 things you can work on. Now that it's a team assignment, like, do we do all 3 or we choose one thing? Because there's the one about the pizzeria. There's the one about it's like a peanut butter sandwich or something.
Right, and then the
Yeah.
fast food. Yeah,
Okay. So
But
do
you
we
should-
pick one or
actually, you should do 2 of those as a
Okay.
team,
cool?
and I'll change that.
Okay, so we can pick any 2 and we do it as a team.
Right.
Okay.
So you turn in 1 piece of paper for the whole team. So if you, like Ivana, if you're on the team with Alexander and you want to turn in the first piece and the second piece, that's okay. But I really prefer that you put it all on one document. That way it's less confusing, and I get confused easily, you guys. Okay, so if you have questions with that, and in the week ahead, just reach out via email or text. You can always text me and say, I just sent you an email, so check that out. I do check the email, but honestly, there's so much stuff that I get from the university, which is just stuff that I delete, but I might miss it. I've missed some things before, so it's not a bad thing. I don't feel bad if you text me and say I emailed you for XYZ. Okay. So I'll fix that for the assignment number 2 to say do 2 of those, and I'll post that at the break. And Peter, you sent me something in the chat, and I will get that for you at the break too. So that's okay. Then we're going to dive into, can you guys see the slides okay? For improve and control?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I always like to get confirmation just because. Hang on 1 second. Let me move this around. Okay. So we're going to talk about the improve. So a lot of people keep thinking that the I means implement, but it doesn't. It means improve, because that's really what we're trying to do in this phase after we've done the first 3, the DMA. So we've defined it, we've done our measurements, we've done some analysis. Now we're taking the results of the analysis and trying to say, okay, what do we do to improve this? What do we do to get the results that we really want? And how are we going to be able to do that going forward? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at how do we use the first 3 steps, the defining, measuring all the measurements we did, and analyzing. And sometimes, as I said before, you do some measurements, analyze, do some more measurements, and do some different things. So that's what we want to do. And want to make sure that we now take that into this. How do we make that and take steps toward improving that so that we get our desired results, or we get improved results, which are really what we're trying to do. So the improved piece is to really develop viable options. So the first thing that we're trying to do is to say, okay, what are things we can do? What changes can we make? What are the available alternatives and what can be changed that's going to give us a better result. So the best idea is the best way to get a good idea is to come up with several ideas. So we want to look at what are some of the solutions and the options for making that improvement. We want to, again, build on the outcomes that we found in the analyze phase. And we're always trying to dig into that root cause, the real heart of the matter, the thing that once we peel all that onion away, what's the core and what's going to be left that says this is our real problem. Now, how do we make a change that improves that? So, and we also want to avoid creating different problems or messing something up that's working just fine, because we often find that in production environments where we tweak something at one part of the process and it ends up not being very compatible with a process down the line. So we want to make sure that we don't do that, that we keep everything as clean as possible and we don't fix one problem and create three more for us. So we want to identify the possible solutions, and we often use brainstorming techniques to do that. You guys, how many of you have done brainstorming activities before? Okay, what are some of the rules of brainstorming?
Never say anything negative about anyone's ideas.
Right. So we want to try to get participation from everybody. We pull together our key people, our subject matter experts, our SMEs, and we try to get them and to everybody come up with ideas, right? So the first thing we do is we tell everybody either come with ideas, and generally, even if you tell them that, you say, for 5 minutes, we're going to talk about the problem, and we're going to let you guys capture your ideas on a piece of scratch paper in front of you, or Post-it notes or something like that. So then we start sharing those information, sharing those ideas. And one of the main rules is that you don't criticize at the beginning, and you really want to capture them as true to what is said in the meeting as you can. This is not a place where a facilitator is trying to wordsmith for the person who's coming up with the ideas. You really want to take those ideas that come from these people that are participating and capture them pretty much verbatim. What else is a rule of brainstorming? Anybody? One of the rules is you want everybody to participate. So how do you get everybody to participate?
I remember, I guess last week, there was another guy or student on here that did participate in a brainstorming activity. And if I remember correctly, everybody, like you said, everybody had a sticky note they put on the wall. But I think there was, he was like a moderator or a person who kind of like team leader, like how he made sure that everybody had a say. So somebody was designated to make sure that everybody had a say. If I remember that correctly.
Yeah, so you can make sure that everybody has Post-it notes and put them on the wall, or you can go around the room and just call on everybody one at a time. So I could just say, okay, Alexander, Aggie, Peter, Ivana, blah, 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 blah. And you can pass, or you can share your idea, one idea at a time. And then if I'm the facilitator, I'm going to be capturing those. So you want to make sure you get that kind of broad participation and not somebody who's got a lot of invested interest in this or a lot of ideas themselves to take over the meeting. Because somebody that's very quiet, and in this case, not turning on their camera, not saying very much, might have the real great idea that sparks everybody else and says, oh, that's great, we could do this and this and this. But you at the brainstorm, you really just want to capture these ideas. You don't really want to start evaluating them, good, bad, or indifferent. You really just capture them. Now, one idea can spark another one, and so you can keep adding into that pool. So everybody come up with 3 or 5 ideas, And then you capture all of those. And if you get them, people that have similar ideas, you can put an X by them or check mark or something like that, some to indicate that came up more than once. And then, you can listen to what everyone else says, and that an idea that somebody says might spark a new idea in you. And so you might pass in round 3, and then, oh yeah, somebody comes up with something and it says, oh, now I have a new idea. So when it gets to your turn in round 4, you're back in participating. There's no, it's not like a game where you pass and you can never get back in. So you want to make sure you do that. And then in this improve stage, we want to select the right solutions, and we want to do a test pilot. So we want to do a small test and make sure, again, that everything's working the way it should, and that what we thought was going to happen actually does happen. So we want to make sure when we're generating these solutions that we document the assumptions and we talk about those as a team, and really get our arms around those. So we say, okay, these are the things we're assuming. So we're assuming that the material is going to stay the same. We're assuming that the workforce is not going to change drastically, that we're going to use the workers that we have today. With the exception, of course, that someone may quit, we might have to hire someone new, but we're not going to change the whole workforce just for this project. And so you want to document those things where the equipment is going to get calibrated, or we're going to use it as is, whatever the issues are. That's what we want to do. And again, we want to challenge each other's ideas, and there's kind of a fine line between challenging and being too harsh and shutting people's creativity down. And maybe being too much of a cheerleader. Oh yeah, that's the great idea. Let's just do that. That sounds good to me. We're done. So you really want to, and versus, that'll never work. We tried that 3 years ago and it went nowhere. So you don't really want to do that. That's not challenging the ideas. The challenging the ideas is to say, okay, that's good. Now, could we do something more? Or is that going to create a problem here? Or does that get to this part of the problem, and does that address this symptom that we were having with this issue? So you want to challenge each other so you get a good idea, that you get something that's robust and that's comprehensive. So thinking about, out of the box thinking and all of the brainstorming and everything is important. So we want to think about what can be done, what might be done. And again, keep in mind the result that you're trying to get. How are you what's this going to look like at the end? What's the improvement that you're trying to do? So, we want to watch out. We don't want negative brainstorming. We want to try to just get more and more ideas out there. Anything that is a negative, we want to try to turn that into a positive. Can I put somebody on mute? Thank you. Somebody got it. I didn't know who that was in the background. We want to look, think about the visual piece. We want to think about the words. We want to say, what is the solution? What does it look like, feel like, sound like, smell like? What is it we're trying to get to? That's the improved phase. That's the better solution. That's what we're trying to do. We want to think about archetypes, the typical example of something. What are the different perspectives? We want to look at what's more innovative than just plain normal. And then look at role playing the different functions, the engineering, the operations, look at it from different perspectives, which is why you really want to get subject matter experts from these different areas into the brainstorming area and to the evaluation stage of that. And then you want to make sure that you compile everything and figure out, okay, these are the things that are related, and this is how we can craft a solution from all of these great ideas. So we want to make sure not to limit our good solutions, look short term, what we can do now, and then know that we might have to have a short-term solution and a long-term solution because we can't do everything or we can't get there in one step. So then that's when you get incremental steps or this multi-generation planning that says, okay, we're going to do this right away. And then we're going to go get this equipment or get a tool. And as soon as the tool's made, then we can do this. And then ultimately we'll be able to automate this because that's the right way to do that. So we want to think about, taming those wild ideas versus trying to get some life and energy into a more mundane suggestion. And then we want to figure out how we're going to select that. And oftentimes we want to use like a weighted matrix tool and establish the criteria and put the weights to that. So what are we trying to do in terms of time, in terms of resources, in terms of investment, and all of those things. So if we have 2 or 3 really good ideas, which would be great, then how do we compare those and choose the one that's going to be the best for our business? So then you want to say, okay, how are we going to know goodness? That's the criteria. How are we going to know that this is a good solution? If it does this, if it reduces the time it takes, our cycle time, if it doesn't require a big investment, that might be one of the criterias. If it's, we might put more weight on something that we can do very quickly and versus something that we're going to have to go order some tools or equipment and change some things around and take some time to implement it. And then we want to use consensus versus just majority rule. So when we talk about consensus, what does that mean to you?
Everybody agrees.
That everybody agrees? Yeah. And it might not be that everybody says, oh yeah, that's the best idea, but it's really that everybody can support that idea. So you agree to support that choice. Because it's not like a majority rule. So it's not let's vote. And if there's 8 of us that vote for and 4 of us that vote against, we're going to do that. It's really about talking through the process and making sure that everyone has support of your final decision. I'll give you an example of this. I had a time a few years ago when I was traveling with a group. We had a design engineer. I was the manufacturing engineer. We had somebody that was a buyer and somebody that was from quality. So there were 4 of us on this team, and we were trying to choose a supplier. So we went to 3 different suppliers. And when we got there, we kind of went different directions. The design person went off with the design engineers. I went to the factory to see what was going on. I was often with the quality person because they were looking at the quality systems and whatever. The buyer went off to look at their business systems and things like that. And we all kind of looked at the inventory management and the workflow and all of that. So we had a challenge to find a supplier who could design and manufacture a unit that was going to go into our product. And this was a defense product, and it was kind of tricky. So it wasn't something off the shelf, it was customized. And so we looked at these different factories. So the first factory we went to, the designer went off with the design people and they looked at some of the testing they were doing, and they came back and he had got some good information. And I went off and looked at the manufacturing piece of it, the quality person and the business person. And so then we all rated these. We did the same thing for the second and the third location we went. So we were all on the same trip. When we got back together, we said, okay, now let's put all of our findings out on the table. And it was obvious pretty quickly, one supplier was not going to work. So we narrowed it down to the 2. And then we started talking about the pluses and the minuses. We talked about what was important to us. And pretty early on, the designer said that supplier A has a design that he thinks is going to work. So he said, this is the design. We brought it back. We brought back the prototype. We put it in our system, and it's not quite there, but it's close, and we think this is going to work. We brought back the prototype from the second company, and it's not working, and we don't think, we can't see a path forward. We can't see how we can get from this design in their current state to where we need to be in our final product. So it really was saying that this doesn't, that the second supplier, the design isn't going to work. But that was a problem, because in the first supplier, the design was really good, but their practices in the factory were not so hot. The quality person was very upset about what he saw in the factory with things like straps not being worn where they needed to wear those for ESD, and not very good control of their processes. I was in agreement with that. The factory wasn't all that clean or neat. It was not well organized, and they had some things that they were storing, like in the aisles. There was material in the aisles. It just wasn't, you didn't get a good feeling about the factory. So the second one, however, had a very good factory, and the quality person said, oh, this is where we have to go, because they're on top of their quality, they're on top of their practices. And the business person, the buyer said, either one is fine with me. So they had no major differences. So we talked about it and said, well, if the design isn't going to work in number 2, then we're going to have to go with number 1. And we talked about it and said, yeah, we don't like that because their manufacturing's not so good, and we might have some problems there, but we need to convey that to them and make sure that they know that they're going to have to up their game on that. Well, we thought we had a consensus, and so we were saying, okay, number 1. And the quality person literally stood up. He had notebooks where he'd taken his notes. He threw his papers on the table, and then he shoved them across the table and said, you aren't listening to me. We, that supplier isn't good. They have all of these issues. And I was shocked. I was like, I probably sat there with my mouth open, because we thought we had consensus, but we did not. So we had to start all over and talk about the issues. And yes, we agreed that the first supplier did not have a good factory, and they did not have a handle of all those practices. But we also said that we knew how to help them get there and get the things in place that they would need in order to manufacture that product for our company so that it would work in our product. We saw a path forward, and we knew we could get there. Now, it wasn't going to be easy or pretty, and it wasn't, because that's what we ended up doing. But we really needed to get the quality person not to, love this idea and say, oh yeah, this is great, but to say, I don't really like this answer, but this is the only answer that's going to give us the final solution that we need. So looking at the thing as a whole, we said, how do we get from, one of these suppliers a solution that's going to work in our product and give our customers what we need in the time frame we have, for the budget we have, and whatever. Now, we could have said we can go keep shopping, we can get some new suppliers on board, but our schedule was not going to allow that. So we really had to get to consensus, which is that everybody supports the final selection, the solution that we've outlined, and the decision that we've made. It doesn't mean that it has to be your first choice. It doesn't mean that you have to be jumping up and down and saying, oh, this is wonderful, this is going to be perfect, because nothing's perfect. At least I've never seen perfect work with suppliers, and I've been in this business a long time, but we had a path forward there, and we knew that it was going to take some work, and we were willing to put that work in from both a manufacturing engineering perspective and ultimately from the quality perspective, once we got him kind of pulled off the ceiling and calmed down a bit. So consensus, sometimes it takes longer to get a decision that way than let's vote, right? Let's vote is the easier, quicker way to do that. But when you have these major projects, and these types of projects are typically pretty big, broad big potential impact, then you really need to make sure that you've got people supporting the direction that you've chosen to go and the solution that you've chosen to implement, because it's important that everybody walks out of that room and is supportive of that. It's very, very difficult in an organization, in a culture, and you guys have probably seen this, where you have people who say, well, that wasn't a really good decision. And you know what, that's probably not going to last. So they say that we have to do that, but we don't really have to do that. And if we just wait a while, wait 6 weeks, they'll be on to something else. And you guys all seen that kind of stuff happen in the workplace. So sometimes that does happen. And so you don't want that for these kinds of decisions when you're making the decision and say, this is the process we're going to change. These are the changes we're going to implement. You really need people saying, yes, we are going to do that. And this is going to work. Yes, it's got some challenges and we know it's not going to be the easiest thing to do, but we had a good process. We picked a solution that we think is going to work, and we're all going to support that. Supporting that outside that room is very important. What it's also important to make sure that your concerns are heard inside the room, but I wouldn't suggest you do it the way my quality buddy did it, because it was pretty dramatic, and it took us a while to kind of get past that. So once you've picked the solution, then you want to make sure that you validate that your expectations are met, that you're looking for. This is what we projected is going to happen. Is that what we're really doing and what we're really seeing? You guys all know what a pilot is, a pilot test. Anybody not know that? We talk about beta units and prototypes and piloting a solution. They're all referring to the same thing, which is just that you do it in a small scale or on a particular area before you implement the thing wholesale all across the board. So there's nothing worse than putting a big system in and spending money and time on doing that and turning it on and it doesn't go, it doesn't do anything. So you want to make sure that you do that and make sure that you test it out, do a trial run kind of thing. So you want to pilot it. You want to make sure that you have identified the root cause, that you document these steps and your analysis around the root cause, so that you validate that, yes, we did get the root cause. This is, and fixing this will fix this for going forward. And then you also want to do the poka-yoke thing, which is error proofing it and saying, okay, this happened once. How do we keep this from happening again? How many of you have seen in the workplace where you make a change to the workplace, you get a new system, you get a new process, you change something, and it's okay, this is good. And then all of a sudden you find out, oh, it's that error that we had before, whatever went wrong 4 months ago, 6 months ago, is happening again. And sometimes it's, oh, we had this 2 years ago and now it's happening again. Has anybody seen that happen in their workplace? Yeah.
I'm experiencing it right now, and it's because we're implementing a new system. But we were suddenly told that it's a new system that we're going to use, and we were being trained on it. But the supervisor of my department isn't that tech savvy, so it's like everyone in our department is using it, but she's not using it. And so like the same issues that we would have before, where she never really knew what was happening with cases, is happening because she's not using it. But yeah.
Yeah, if you
Like
don't
you
have
guys are
everybody
class.
on board and everybody's not fully trained and working toward implementation. Now, it sounds like you have a bigger problem than this, but sometimes you train people, and if you have a team of 5 or 6 or 8 or 20, you have a small number that get it really fast. And then you have, I'll say, like the majority of people get to where they feel like, okay, I've got this, I can do this. And then there's a couple of people that it just takes longer to actually learn and get trained and get proficient on the new way of doing things. Sometimes it's just because they're very deliberate about what they're doing. They want to learn the steps. They want to make sure they understand it. Sometimes it's because maybe they don't want to learn it and they're happy to kind of revert back and drag their feet and see if this is really going to go away. And if that's the problem, then you need a management intervention in that to help that person understand that this needs to be embraced and you need to try at this. And sometimes it's just that people learn at different speeds. And if you work with a bunch of whiz bang people and you are not the whiz bang, maybe you're the new kid on the block, you've only been there for a short period of time. And so everybody else picks it up because they have more background, they have more context, they have more experience doing whatever you're doing. And it's just taking one person or two people a little bit longer to get there. So you want to make sure that you are looking at those things and encouraging people and helping, and not just, oh yeah, two people got it, we're good, let's go. You know, that's not the way you want to do it. So, but you also want to put things in that keep you from backsliding and keep those errors from happening. Sometimes that's a tool. Sometimes that's a break between processes. Sometimes it's just a whole new process or a new piece of equipment or something, but you want to make sure that you don't allow that so that people can slide back, or that you're going to see that same error, that same problem crop up 3 months, 6 months, even a couple of years down the road. So your new systems are hard. Ivana, did you have an example you wanted to share?
I mean, I often experience situations where nothing would change, but it would just be advertised as change. But then, you know, like there would be like diagrams of illustrating that nothing is changing. So a lot of that more than ever backsliding. So I guess I was saying I didn't ever have an experience of that.
Okay. Well, some people have seen those things, some people haven't, but those are things to look out for. And when you're trying to lean things out, sometimes if you tend to get too lean, then you'll see problems happen again too. So you want to make sure you get that nice balance in there. So error proof, that's a Japanese term, poka-yoke. And that's like, you know, putting a bell or a whistle on something, or something that says if this is going the wrong direction, or before we get too far off course, we're going to get a warning bell to keep us and get us back on track before we have the same kind of error. So we want to look at that. And then safety features, always, especially when you're changing a manufacturing process. If you're out on the production line, you want to make sure people are safe. So sometimes when you have new tools, new equipment, new processes, people can get hurt because they don't know quite how to use them. So you want to make sure that they're fully instructed in how to use them, what the dangers are, what the safety protocols are, and you've put all that there. So you want to modify your documentation, all those processes that we talked about earlier that often sit dormant in a drawer or in a share drive that nobody's looking at. Make sure you pull out all that documentation, update it with the latest and greatest. After you've done, you can do that before you do the, as you're doing the pilot. But once you've done the pilot and verified that this is going to work, then you want to do the final rev of the documentation. You want to make sure that all those changes are incorporated into your documentation and that everybody is trained. And again, sometimes you have to train people 2, 3, 4 times, and you have to train more than just the workers. You have to train the supervisors, sometimes any inspectors, auditors. So we always think about changing the worker and training the worker. I'm sorry, not changing, but training the worker on the change. But you've got to make sure all the support people know that as well, which is the quality inspectors, the people doing the testing, their managers. And sometimes managers say, oh, I don't need to go to that training. Yeah, you probably do. If you're making big changes in the processes, you want to go for 2 reasons. One, then you get exposed to exactly what the new system is. And managers attending training with workers has a huge impact on how quickly people pick it up, on how seriously they take the new change and the new training. And it gives the supervisor the ability to encourage and coach and see who's accepting and maybe who's not accepting, and may need a little one-on-one coaching to get there to say, we're going to incorporate this. So let's make sure that you support this and you're you're in on this. So does that make sense? Okay, so that's that's the improve piece. Now let's look at the control piece. So we want to say, what do I have to say here? It's so implement and control are in a single stage in this DMAIC process. So I is for improve, it's not for implement. And then the control stage really involves the full implementation and the control. So even though people get it wrong, and sometimes I find myself getting it wrong too. So we want to make sure that we not only put those improvements in place, we implement them, but as we implement them, we want to put the controls in place. We want to identify the metrics. So we've done all this measurement. Now we say, okay, we know what we're supposed to get. We've proven that out. Now we want to put the controls in place so that we can monitor and make sure that the improvements that we wanted, that we intended to get, are going to be, that we're going to see those, and that we're going to be able to maintain and sustain those. So we're looking at further measurements and metrics, right? So how are we going to measure this? How are we going to check this to make sure it's working like it's supposed to be working? So oftentimes it's simple cost benefit analysis. Sometimes it's really just taking some data, some measurements in the process, or recording how things are going, recording the time it takes to do that. And maybe not every one, but do a sample of one every day, every week, or something like that. Sometimes we have to have this executive approval on the control before we actually fully roll everything out, because we might need some investment. We might need some equipment. We might need an additional headcount. We might need some materials or tools. And if this is a big project, and a lot of these are, then it's might need some project management skills to actually get it implemented and to cover all the areas that we're trying to cover. So we're trying to, again, roll out the full implementation, but at the same time, make sure we put the controls in place, because there's nothing worse to a company to invest and make a change and expect to get some benefit out of that, to see that the benefit, oh yeah, we got the benefit for the first month, and then it kind of went away. It didn't stick, and we didn't get the full benefit that we expected out of that for whatever reason. And sometimes you don't know that till 6 months later. So you want to put those controls in, those metrics in. And some companies, it seems to go either way too many metrics that aren't really telling us things, or sometimes we just trust that, oh, we did the work, so we don't really have to put a lot of new metrics in on this because we did the work, it's the right solution, and it'll just take care of itself. But that's not always the case. So we want to be aware of that. Traditional leadership both incorporates and relies on some form of control, so that we have some feedback on how our processes are working, on how the improvements that we've targeted are actually coming to fruition. When we have lean leadership, lean leaders are pretty comfortable. They're more comfortable in a lot of instances than traditional leadership. They're more comfortable with uncertainty, with a little bit of risk, because they understand it more and they're prepared for it. So with lean leadership, they're good when we take time to define the problem. Remember, I told you this is one of the areas where companies really go quick to, let's just go to a solution. They don't want to say, let's define it, let's measure it, let's analyze it. They say, this is the solution, let's just go implement. But that's not where you get the best solution. And it might be that you're treating symptoms more than the root cause. So companies that are lean in culture and really have embraced that allow adequate time to define the problem sufficiently and comprehensively enough so that you're going to get the best solution. They will work with fluid timelines. When are we going to get this? That doesn't mean that they're full of patience and that they will allow this to go on indefinitely, but they are more comfortable with, okay, this is the short-term solution. We're going to get this done here, and then we're going to be able to take this next step and then the final step to get to the full solution. So they're fluid, more fluid with timelines and how this gets phased in, rather than just push, push, push and do the best you can and then wash your hands and go on to something else. And they will also make sure that there's a lot of people looking at the solution and that you've got all the perspectives covered and touched all those bases to make sure that it is a good cross-functional team working on this, and it's has a lot of perspectives in it. So from a financial perspective in lean systems and lean management, they're going to look at the cost. They're going to look at not only the cost and the benefits, but they're going to look at things like cost avoidance. They're going to be more willing to look at some of the soft costs involved, because they understand that those soft costs really do translate to savings at the bottom line, even though sometimes the final solution gets a little bit muddy. You guys know what I mean when I say soft costs or cost avoidance versus a cost savings? Okay, Peter, thank you for telling me so clearly. That's what I need to know. Anybody familiar with those terms?
I'm guessing it's like the smaller expenses or the smaller costs that aren't like very significant to like changes in the company or anything.
Sometimes they're smaller costs. Sometimes the soft costs are just harder to measure and they're measured a little differently. So a hard cost is like, okay, this process took me 10 minutes to do, and it took one person 10 minutes with $10 worth of material. So if I can do it with $8 of material, and if I can do it in 6 minutes, then that's what we call a hard savings, right? We're going to be able to measure that. And we know that it took us 10 minutes to do it before. And now whatever changes we've made, we can do the same process in 6 minutes. Or we took $10 worth of material to do this, and now I only need $8 of material to make this because I've reduced my waste. I've cut out the waste in there in the material. So, and if you can do both, that you're reducing your time and you're reducing the material, then you're really getting a big win. But those things are tangible and those are measurable, right? And we can repeat those. And it doesn't mean that everyone takes, say, 6 minutes, but the average is going to be 6 minutes. So if you're really good, you might be able to do it in 5 minutes. And if you're a little slower, it might take 6.5 or 7, but it no longer takes us 10 because we've reduced the number of steps, or we've reduced the number of parts, or whatever we've done to it. So the hard savings says it's less time, less money in that regard, because less labor hours means less labor charge. And it's also less material. So we can measure that, and that should show up on the bottom line, right? Have you guys all had accounting? So, like, fixed costs and variable costs and direct costs. So if we can reduce the direct cost, that's a good thing. And the direct cost for the material and the labor, direct costs for material are the things that we're paying for that actually we ship with the product, and the direct labor is the labor that actually is associated with producing that. So it's the production line workers and some of that. Soft costs sometimes are like overhead costs. So it might be that, we can change our management structure a little bit, and we only have, instead of having 2 supervisors, we have 1. So that can be a little bit of a hard cost, but it's soft cost too, because managers do a lot of different things and kind of go in different directions. But soft costs are also things like, how motivated are my employees, or how focused are they on the job? So if I can get them to put more focus on the job and they enjoy the job more, which means there's less like chatter on the job, there's less taking breaks and running off to get a bottle of water or a cup of coffee or any of that. Those are soft costs. So it still takes me X number of times to do the job, But if I can like increase my productivity and I can get them to stay on the job a little more or stay focused, like I say, fewer breaks because they're more comfortable, they don't have to stand up and stretch or whatever, then those are soft costs. So soft cost means it can mean things like keeping retention so that we don't have the same employee turnover that we had, that we have again, a happier kind of workforce, that we have, oh, I can't even think. And I had a couple of things I was going to mention and they've gone out of my brain. But those are this, oh, and a cost avoidance. You know what a cost avoidance is? I don't see anybody shaking.
Is that kind of similar to opportunity cost, where if you choose path A, then you can avoid the cost of path B?
Yes, yeah, it's very much linked to that. That is one kind of cost avoidance. If we do path A, then we avoid this. It's also, if we don't make a change, sometimes and I worked in purchasing a lot, sometimes it's the supplier wants to raise my price. So they said, we charged you $80 for this last year, but now it needs to go to $84. If I can negotiate with them and either keep it at $80 or at least maybe 82 versus 84, I'm avoiding that extra cost that I would have incurred had I not put any effort into that relationship and into that part to keep that cost as low as possible. And sometimes it's working with the supplier to say, let's look at the cost drivers. Maybe you can use my freight rates. Maybe you can use my material pricing to be able to do something cheaper on your part. Or so we can keep that price at the $80. It's not going to be a cost savings when it went from $80 to $78. But if we can just keep it at $80, then we avoided the increase that would have come our way had we not taken any action and done anything. And like you said, Ivana, it's the difference between the options too. If we have to make a change, we can avoid spending more over here for this or that. So those are kind of the soft costs. And a lot of companies don't want to they don't count cost avoidance because they say it doesn't hit the bottom line. But I got to tell you, a lot of the things that are supposed to hit the bottom line don't necessarily, because time after time I've seen, especially in procurement and supply chain, where you say, okay, these are our cost savings for the year. So here's our $1 million of cost savings. And the finance guys look at it and say, I'm not seeing $1 million less in material costs. So the VP of materials or purchasing will stand up and say, yes, here's all the things. Here's what we paid before. Here's what we're paying now. And yet the finance person says, I don't see that in my numbers. And when I look at the direct material portion, and that happens for certain reasons. When purchasing negotiates a new price, they look at it on a forward-looking basis. So they say, okay, I just negotiated this from $12 to $10, so I saved $2. But I saved $2 over what I'm going to buy in the next year, not what I've already bought and not what I'm, bought today, but my next order is going to be less. And I usually take that $2 and take it times an annualized quantity. So whatever time in the year it is, you just say, this is what we used in the last 12 months. So this is what we expect to use in the next 12 months. If that's 1,000 pieces, then you multiply $2 times 1,000 pieces and you just say, I saved $2,000. But finance won't see that because one, they haven't, one is a projection going forward, and finance is doing all the backward stuff and saying, what did we pay and what did we pay up till now? So they have the most current version of that. So they don't necessarily match up. So I say cost avoidances should be put in there too, because that gives an indication of things that you're, one, being proactive, and two, that your costs should not be rising over the next year as much as they might have been. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my first answer to like it sounds a lot like tax avoidance, but it's not tax evasion, it's tax avoidance. It's like you're being proactively like taking care, putting money into vehicles that help you save taxes, like an IRA or something like that, you know.
Yeah,
It's like being proactive about it.
except there's no tax bucket, if you will. It all kind of goes into the same, it's an expense.
Yeah.
So we're just keeping our expenses down by whatever. And sometimes that's by the way you buy materials. Sometimes that's by using the labor that you have and making sure that your most experienced workers are working on the things that are the hardest or take the longest so that you can apply their skills. You know, or the way you organize the work in different ways to keep the cost down. But those are the hard costs, and those are the things that we're trying to do. But you also want to keep in mind those soft costs. Another soft cost is any of those waste that we talked about, right? The production, overproductions, the parts that sit there on the shelf. Yeah, we made 100 when we only needed 90. So we have 10 sitting there, incurring holding costs in inventory because we didn't sell them, because we made 10 more than we needed to. Or it's the waiting time. So now I've got waiting time in my factory. I've got parts sitting around waiting. If I reduce that, it's a soft cost, but it's not, again, it's not direct labor. So it's not going to reduce my cost of doing that. But if I can free up the space and not have things waiting, so I can use that space in a more productive manner, maybe I can get another workstation in there or another piece of equipment or another person, and I can do more with that. So that soft cost of reducing the wait time is a good thing to do. So you can go back to that list of that Tim Woods list of all of those things. You know, if I'm using my people more efficiently and effectively, that eighth waste was the unused skills. So if I'm putting people to work and upping their contribution, then I'm getting more out of them. So that's going to be a soft cost. So those things are, again, they're harder to measure than what we typically look at as direct material, direct labor, that kind of stuff. So a lot of those soft costs a lot of those wastes can be, some of them are clearly, like the number of defects is usually a hard cost, but some of the rework in there is a little bit of a softer cost because you tweak things a little bit that are not fully reworked and fully rejected. So that's a soft cost. You can save a little bit of money that way. Any other comments, thoughts on that?
I feel like just what I heard, like you explaining everything, I'm just like applying it to like my work situation, and I'm making sense of it all. Is what I saw when I first entered this place that I started working, there was like no retention whatsoever. I joined, and then I just came to find out that in my department, in just 6 months, 6 employees left, and they hadn't even lasted like a year. And then I was hired differently than they were, but I learned that like their entire like hiring process was much more expensive because he was paying like a recruiter. And anywho, but then I feel like now the way that I'm looking at it is that in all reality, he never needs this many employees, but his employees are never really happy. And I think it's because he doesn't focus on his soft costs. So now what he's doing so that he ends up not losing employees, he's just hiring way more. And then now it's just like a lot of the new ones, they just don't have a lot of work to do because he doesn't really need that many people in one department. And then I feel like if he would just focus on like the soft costs, he could potentially save like actually 40, 50, 60, $70,000 a year, depending on the salary he gives to the new employee who doesn't, we technically don't need like four or
Not
five people in
fully
the department.
engaged. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you work, Nanar?
I work in a immigration law firm.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So there's like, it's multiple departments, and then my department just focuses on certain visas that we do. Ours is considered to be one of the busiest ones, but mine was the one that had the least retention due to other reasons that I came to find out about later on. But it's just like what I learned with my coworkers, there was a lot of chatter, like you were saying, and it was because they weren't happy. And I didn't want to engage in it, so I would just do what I would do. And I think it's because of all these small things. A lot of them would just leave, and now he's just trying to gain people, but he doesn't like need it anymore technically. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into it, but that's just kind of like how I just reasoned it, like in my mind.
High turnover is not a lean organization, and it happens for a lot of reasons. One, either people are not getting trained, and so they're frustrated because they don't feel trained. It's not good working conditions, and people don't want to stay in working conditions that aren't comfortable. If it can be a hostile work environment, by not good environment. And I mean, it can be like hot, right? If you're working in a warehouse and it's hot, and some people don't like to work that. So it's hot or it's dirty or that kind of thing. So that's sometimes it's because of the work that you do, or it's very tedious work. And some paperwork can be very tedious, but then it can be like a hostile environment where you have a boss that's not easy to work for, that's either a control freak or harassment or any number of things that way. So whatever that is, whether it's like a natural thing that it's just a warehouse and it's hot and dirty, and you got to find the right people who are happy to work in that environment, or it's you got to get rid of manager X over there because they are the person that nobody wants to work for. And when you finally figure that out and move that person around or take that managerial responsibility, it's like, whoa, a whole breath of fresh air. People suddenly do that. Or that you get the training or you get this or whatever. Then you get people who are trained and competent and can do the work. And like you said, Dinar, then they can do more work more quickly and you don't need as many people. So all of those things can combine. And but again, it's hard to sometimes assess that, especially when you're in the middle of that, to figure out what the savings is. And so you say, well, this is not saving me any money, but sometimes 6 months later you say, oh, now I can see that we did save money by doing these things. So lean is not, there's certain things that are readily apparent and are measurable very quickly, like we reduce the time it takes to put these things together. Or for you, if it's a visa, we changed this form or we automated this form. So you only type the name in once and it prints it on 6 different things. And so now we can process this much more quickly. Some of that versus, oh, now we've got people who have been here, 3 people who've been here over 6 months. So they understand how to do this and they're getting that rhythm and they can get through this and do it more effectively, more productively. And when we talk about productivity, we measure the output versus the input. So how many visas can you get processed? For the input, the number of people on staff or the number of hours put in by that work team, or whatever you want to, however you want to measure the input. So it's important to do that. So for control, again, we don't want to backslide. That's the thing that is not fun. We don't want that to, all the hard work we did to make the change, we don't want to find out that, guess what? We did the pilot, we updated the process, and we go out and see that they're still doing it the way they did it the old way because nobody really showed them how to use that new tool, or that new screwdriver that we needed didn't come in yet. And so they can't really make that work, or something's going wrong. So backsliding is not a good thing. Duran put some notes together. He's one of the quality gurus. And he said, you need to know the goals, the quality, and all the other goals, as well as the methods. And you need to empower people to call out non-performance. So this is an area that's a lean organization, has an open communication, honest communication, where people are encouraged to say, hey, we got a problem. The Houston, we have a problem thing, that's very much encouraged in a lean environment. And Duran was one of the ones that noted that and said, we need to get people to do that. Because if you have people that are trying to hide their errors or not count them, I worked at one time, we had we had what ended up being a design problem. And the part had just bad dimensions on it. So we got one part that was, I'll say like this big. This is like a 5x7, and it was supposed to made up to a 8.5 by 11 part. So it's a little more complicated than that. But if you, let's see if I can find something that's 8.5 by 11. Here we go. No, that isn't 8.5 by 11. Here. Okay, so if we're trying to match this and this, they're not going to match, right? There's no way that they match up. So if they both have to be upright, it's not going to work. So what happened is they were hand sanding this part, and when it had some curves in it, and when they were hand sanding it, the workers there, they were messing them up because it shouldn't have needed that kind of hand sanding, but they were trying to make the parts fit. So I caught them, and they said, "Oh," and I said, "Has this happened before? Have you known this?" And one guy said, "Show him, Jane." And he took me over to his drawer. There were like 5 parts in there that needed to be thrown away. They were scrapped because they had tried to fix them. So you can't fault their motives. They were trying to make the 2 parts work, but when I looked at it, I took I looked at the drawing, and I looked at the parts, and I said, well, these parts are to the drawing, so they're made correctly per the specification, but this specification is wrong. You can't have this part meet up with this part. This mating surface needs to be the same dimension, and it's not. So I called the design engineer, and I said, this was at a big factory, and they were like, it was almost half a mile away in another building. And I said, I need you to come here. And he said, Jane, can't you just tell me? And I said, no, I really can't. I wouldn't ask you if it's not important, but I need you to come down here and look at this, because maybe I'm looking at it wrong. So I was the manufacturing engineer. This person was the design engineer. So he said, okay, I'll come down. He wasn't very happy with me, but I didn't ask him to do that kind of stuff all the time. So he came down, and I said, we have this part and this part, and they don't match. And I said, I think we have a drawing error. And he got a little defensive. And I said, you tell me, because you're the design engineer. Well, I could read a freaking blueprint, and so I knew what I was doing, but he looked at it, he measured it, he did some different things, and he said, yep. He said, we'll fix it. He said, I don't know how that got through, but he said, that's not right. So this part needs to be this dimension, this part needs to be this dimension, and then they will fit, and then you won't have to do all that stuff and do that. So you got to make sure that you get people to put things out in the open. If they had raised their hand the first time they did that, we wouldn't have wasted 5 other parts. And luckily we were defense and aerospace, so we weren't making huge, 10s and 20s and even 1,000 of these a day. So it was over some time, but it's still, we didn't have to waste those parts if people felt empowered and felt like they would be heard and paid attention to, respected, if they raised their hand and said, we got a problem here. So that in a lean culture, that's what you want. People to be able to say, this is wrong. And you know what? If you raise your hand once and you say this, I think we have a problem, and we don't, then that's a good thing. If you think we have a problem and we don't, we can go verify we don't. That's a good thing. That's a much better thing than saying, oh, I don't know that that's a problem. I'm just going to let it go, and we'll make a few more and maybe cause a much bigger mess. That's how recalls happen. That's how companies get sued, because somebody doesn't raise their hand and say, this is a problem and we need to stop it and figure it out before we keep making more and shipping more things out to the customers, because they say, oh, we can't stop. We have customers, we have to keep these products made, we have to keep making them. So it's not good. You want that you want nonconformance to be something that everyone looks for and that everyone feels comfortable highlighting and calling out. So then we have standards, we have metrics, we know what's good. We want to train and retrain and keep training that so that people know the right things to do, the right ways to do them, that they feel good about calling things out when they're not right. Make change management part of the whole culture and create new habits in the workers that we're working with. So we want to update any of the flow charts, the process maps, any of the documentation. If we have to change tools and equipment, workstation, then we need to do that. We need to make those investments. And if we find tools that aren't working, we need to tag them and say, do not use very clearly, get them out of the workspace so that we can't use tools that are bad. So set a new baseline, update our metrics, figure out how we're going to measure it, what we're going to measure, how frequently we're going to measure it, how we're going to track it, how we're going to report it. Because if you're tracking things and measuring things and you're not reporting and you're not reporting broadly, and worst of all, if you're not doing anything with that to say, is this good or good enough, then there's no point in doing that. I think I don't know if I told you guys this story or not, but I worked with a colleague in a different division. And one of the things you measure in procurement and purchasing is on-time delivery. So you measure the on-time delivery of your suppliers, right? Did you order this part? It was supposed to be here in 2 weeks. Did it show up in 2 weeks like it's supposed to? So we measure that, and that's a chronic problem to do that. And this sounds like it's really easy to measure, right? Well, you just measure, was the part where it's supposed to be? But there's a lot of different things that can happen between the supplier and the customer. So the supplier says, all right, you're going to order this from me. So my lead time is 2 weeks, but it takes, a week to get to you. So that means I need to ship it by X date in order for the freight company to have the time he needs to get it to your dock. And the freight, isn't always, not every freight moves like Amazon 2-day kind of thing, right? So, and it's usually a window like 3 to 5 days or 5 to 7 days or something like that. So being too early is not good. Being too late is not good. And you're trying to get that little window there, especially when it's a truckload of stuff or where it comes on a plane or on a rail car or whatever. So you're tracking this and you're saying, okay, here's my delivery. So the supplier says, okay, it's on my dock. It's ready to be picked up. It's all packaged, and the truck doesn't come. So if the truck doesn't come, it's not my fault as a supplier, but if the truck doesn't come on the right day, or we're at the edge of one of that window, so he picks it up a day late, and then maybe the truck has a flat tire or the truck gets stuck, the truck is going between Los Angeles and Chicago, and they get stuck in Denver and Kansas City because of the snow or whatever, then that might take longer to get there. So then if I'm the customer and I'm in Chicago, I say, look, I ordered this stuff. It was supposed to be here on this date and it was late. And the supplier says, hey, it wasn't late. It's not my fault. I had it finished when it should have been finished. And, I can't control the weather, right? I can't control the snowstorms. So you get into this kind of contest over how are you measuring it? Are you measuring it from the eyes of the supplier or from the eyes of the customer? And what does that mean to each company? Because the supplier doesn't want to be told they're late when they had it completed on time and they had it on their dock and it should have been okay, because 99 times out of 100, the truck will pick it up and it will get from point A to point B in that 3 to 5 day window, and everybody will be happy. But the customer's not happy either, because they say, I didn't get the parts and I needed the parts in that kind of time frame. So you're kind of having different ways of measuring it. So my colleague in this different division had created a report to track on-time delivery, but he was looking at it from the deliveries into him as a customer. So he was looking at what's my due date and then what's the date that it actually showed up. Well, he had another complication that some of the parts that showed up at his company had to be tested before they could be accepted. And so they might get stuck in that testing. And also, if they happen to come on a day when a lot of things were delivered, they might not even get attended to by the people working on the dock. Or if the dock happened to have a shortage of workers that day, then they might not be able to receive everything in on the day that it actually was delivered. So sometimes things would get delivered to the company on Tuesday, but if it came late in the day on Tuesday, it might be Wednesday or even Thursday before this system actually showed that it had been received into the system. And if it had to go through some of this testing, that could take 3 to 5 days. So you see where I'm going with this, that all of these things matter. So he came up with this nice subroutine out of this system that he was using to send to suppliers to say, these are the parts that we received late. So it was pretty cool. And we said, okay, this is great. What are you doing with it? Well, we send it out every week to our suppliers. I said, okay, so do you send them out if they have parts that were late? Do you send them out a form to fill out to analyze that? Do you keep track of which suppliers have the most late deliveries or which parts are the most late delivery? No, we just send it out to the suppliers and we expect them to fix it. But okay, so you're reporting it, but you're not tracking it. You're not looking to see, is it getting worse or better? You're not following up with the supplier to say, hey, you had a problem. What are you going to do to fix it? Or what can we do collectively to fix it? He said, no, we don't have time to do that. We just are going to tell them that they're late and they need to fix it. So, okay, if you're that supplier and you get this report card once a week that says, hey, you were late on 3 things this week, you're probably going to be, oh my God, this is not good. So the first time you get it, you're going to say, all right, we need to fix this, right? So you might call the customer and say, what do you want us to do? How do we want to handle this or whatever? And they say, oh, we don't know. We just send you that report to look at. So you might get that report card every week. And if you find out that every couple of weeks you're late on things and they're not calling you, they're not questioning you, they're not asking for compensation or reimbursement, they're not finding out why, are you going to do anything about it? No, you're not. So they said it's up to the supplier, but it's up to the customer to tell them what to do with that and to track that and see if it's actually improving. So they had a big fancy report that they sent out to each supplier, and they had a lot of them, but they weren't doing anything with that data to say, am I getting better? So what am I trying to solve here? The problem they were trying to solve was to improve on-time delivery, but they didn't even really know how to track it, know how to measure it to find out if they were getting any better. So they spent time, they spent money, and they continued to do that for a while. And I got some dirty looks in the meeting when I was kind of asking them about this, but I said, it's good that you're doing that, but you have to follow up with it, right? You have to have somebody who's putting this together and calling that supplier and saying, hey, this is what we saw and what happened here, so that you can take these occurrences where there's flat tires from the freight company or there's weather issues, hurricanes in Florida or whatever, and say, okay, we're not going to count that because that wasn't against you. So here's your report card, not only for the week, but for the month, for the quarter, for the 6 months, so that are we getting better at this or not? And if you can't do that, you're not controlling anything, then you might as well not put any effort into it, because it doesn't help to assess and measure, put metrics on things if you don't know if you're getting better or not. So you need to make sure you do that. Train people, use control charts where you need to, and we'll look at those in a second. And capture your lessons learned. Just like you need to document your assumptions, you need to capture the lessons learned, that this is what's working, this is what's not, and this is what we can do different. So I put this in just because I think it's a good thing to say that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking when we created them. So again, it's attributed to Albert Einstein. I don't know if he actually said that or not, but it kind of makes sense, right? If we're using the same kind of thinking to try to solve our problems that helped us create them or help them get created in the first place, then we might not be using the right kind of thinking. So what can we do to look at it differently and change the way we address things? Okay, so that's 5 and 6. We're going to take a break and then we're going to talk a little bit about some Six Sigma stuff. Okay. So let me stop this. And stop the recording.